We've just learned that the White House is considering inviting Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to that high-stakes meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin next Friday in Alaska. That's according to a senior U.S. official and 3 people briefed on the internal discussions. It will be Trump and Putin's first meeting since Trump retook office and Putin's first visit to U.S. soil since 2015. And the stakes could not be higher for everyone involved. The New York Times reports, quote, Russia has shown no signs of pulling back in its war against Ukraine. Instead, it has intensified its long-range strikes on Ukrainian cities and attacks across the front line. Remember, Trump promised to end Russia's war in Ukraine on his very first day in office. Here's what he had to say yesterday.
It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both. But we'll be talking about that either later or tomorrow or whatever.
Well, this morning, Zelensky flatly rejected that idea, saying in part, quote, Ukraine will not give Russia any awards for what it has done. Critics were also concerned that Ukraine was not involved enough in discussions. Listen.
What I really worry about, and I know many people in Ukraine do too, is that the president will get in a meeting with Putin, one-on-one, no advisors there. And Putin, and I've been in meetings with Putin, he is persuasive. Yeah. He knows his history. He will say, this is just a fair deal, Mr. President. And he'll come out and do a press meeting and say, well, we agreed to this. And he's agreeing to things that are not his to give up.
He has never put pressure on Russia. Russia continues, as we speak, to bombard and kill Ukrainians and take its property. No sanctions and no weapons given to Ukraine to defend themselves. And then to say that you're going to negotiate a deal with Vladimir Putin without taking into consideration of where President Zelensky is no deal at all.
And joining us now is journalist and geopolitics analyst Bobby Ghosh. Bobby, thank you for being here at the table with us this evening. So I remember just a matter of days or weeks ago hearing talk that sanctions could be on the table here. You know, Trump is now angry with Putin. Now we understand he's coming to U.S. soil for the first time in about a decade. What do you make of that fact, this meeting, this summit, and the news now that Zelensky may join them?
Well, to use the kinds of terms that Trump himself uses, what happened here is that he folded. He made an ultimatum. He gave Putin a deadline that was yesterday. It ran out yesterday. Demanded that Putin change his behavior. Putin ignored him. If anything, he ramped up his attacks on Ukraine, and Trump essentially folded and is now rewarding Putin by giving him an opportunity, a photo op with the President of the United States on American soil. The Zelensky thing, the news just broke, as you guys announced it, that the White House is now considering whether to invite him. I mean, how is this a consideration? This should have been invitation number 1. And it's not yet clear, A, that the invitation has gone out, B, that Zelensky is coming, and C, and this is crucial, that Putin will agree to being in the same room as Zelensky. In the past, Putin has rejected that idea. Putin said, I'm not meeting with Zelensky. So these are all balloons that the White House is sending up to try and see. Now, they're responding to not just pushback from Zelensky, but also from very strong pushback from the Europeans, the people who are going to have to live with the consequences of any deal that Trump tries to put out there. President Macron of France said yesterday that you cannot have these discussions without Ukraine being involved, Ukraine being in the room. So Trump is responding to a situation, I suppose, by the very low bar that have been set by Trump's foreign policy in general. I suppose the positive thing is that he is responding to pushback from the Europeans. But that's, as I say, a really, really low bar. I'm not optimistic that anything is going to come out of this. First of all, I'm not 100% certain this meeting is going to take place. And if it does take place, I don't think any needles will be moved. You know?
So Zelensky has already said that he rejects any kind of negotiating settlement that cedes land to Russia that has been taken through Russia's territorial aggression. So it seems like the discussion is already at a non-starter even before it starts. One thing that I do find interesting, though, is how Ukrainian public opinion has shifted. And we have some polling that we can show on screen. But from at the beginning, as wars usually start, the Ukrainians wanted to fight till the end and were rejecting any kind of negotiated settlement. Now you see where there is more of a willingness to negotiate. But still, the polling shows that Ukrainians don't want to cede any territory either. They're with Zelensky there. So what kind of reasonable middle ground is even possible when both negotiating parties are so far apart?
So first and foremost, not only is Zelensky not willing to make a deal, he cannot. The Ukrainian constitution, this is a democratically elected leader of a democratic country. The Ukrainian constitution specifically prohibits giving away territory without the approval of the Ukrainian people. So he would have to take it back to a vote if it came to that. And to your point, it's one thing for Ukrainians to say we want a negotiated settlement, quite another to say we're willing to give up territory. I don't think there's appetite for that at all. You cannot have, throughout history we've seen this, you cannot have any negotiations while the guns are still being fired,
right,
while the missiles are still being fired into Ukraine from Russia. So the starting point, and the Europeans have said this all along, the starting point has to be, there has to be a cessation of fire from both sides, primarily from the Russian side. The Ukrainians have agreed to that. The Russians simply don't want to.
Well, they're doing the exact opposite of that.
They've ramped it up. So before there can be negotiations, the guns have to stop, the missiles have to stop raining down on Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian cities, and then there can be a discussion about negotiations. Who's going to be there, where it's going to take place, who the negotiators are going to be, who the middlemen are going to be. This is going to be a long and we've seen this over and over again. You know, the most recent example in Europe I can think of was during the collapse of the former Yugoslavia and the long negotiations during the Bill Clinton administration that finally led to a settlement there. It takes years for this to take place, but it has to start with a ceasefire. If there's no ceasefire, it's pointless to even talk about this.
I have a question about trust here. So the Trump White House is, you know, there's not a ton of trust there. Putin has said he was going to do ceasefires and then not held them. So who, you know, the Europeans are sort of in there making their need, you know, sort of advocating for Zelensky, but how much does the lack of trust in these two groups really undermine the process?
You put your finger on it. Who's going to be the honest broker that brings all these parties to the table? The United States has to have a big role. The United States has bankrolled to a substantial extent Ukraine's resistance to the invasion, both in terms of arms and diplomatic cover, as well as economic support. So the United States has to be in the room. But can the United States, under this administration, can it play that role of an honest broker? And the short answer is no, it can't. The Europeans don't trust America to play that role. The Ukrainians don't. And frankly, neither really do the Russians. So it has to be somebody else. Who that somebody else is, we don't know yet. Can it be a multilateral organization, the United Nations, something like that? It could be. In the past, there's been some suggestions that these discussions could take place in a neutral place, so in Dubai, in the UAE, and maybe the Emiratis play a role there, or the Qataris play a role there. We'll get to that again, but it has to start with a ceasefire. It has to start with all the sides agreeing that while the negotiations are taking place, they'll stop being at war.
At this point, is Trump not embarrassed by the way that this has been perceived by the world? The way that his work, Steve Witkoff, you know, the impression, it seems, from most is that, you know, Putin has tricked you again and again and again. He's going to do it again in Alaska if he arrives, as you said. That's a big if.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
does he understand, from your assessment, what this appears to look like to everyone else?
He seems capable of blowing past every embarrassment and sort of reframing it in his own mind and the way he communicates it as a victory. So this happened, you know, we remember the first time when he went to Singapore to meet Kim Jong-un. And he said, you know, we fell in love and I'll get a deal and I'll tell them to stop the nukes, and they will. And they completely ignored him. But in his mind, that was a big success. So he's very interested in the pageantry of being president. So having a big summit in Alaska with a man that he admires or he respects because he sees Putin as this powerful figure, somebody that, you know, he has for a very long time admired. This is not just some short-term thing. being in his presence and having that summit gives the appearance of action, even though it's not actual action. And that may be enough for Trump. In the past, he has been satisfied with that. And to be honest, to give him props, he's been able to reframe that and communicate that to his support base, and they seem willing to buy it. They seem willing, the people that he cares about most, the people who vote for him, who form the base of MAGA, they seem to buy into all this pageantry and the way he presents it to them. So if he thinks he can get away with it one more time, then he will try. But you have to assume that with each failure, there is building up this sort of backlog. And at some point, the dam will break and that support base will turn around and say, well, we've seen this movie before. We see this thing happening over and over again.
Well,
at some point, they have to say that.
It is going to certainly be an interesting week as we watch if this happens and how it unfolds. So, Bobby Ghosh, thank you so much for being with us.